Welcome to Wisconsin Veterans Museum's movie night and virtual discussion. Tonight we're talking about Fury, but before we get started, I just want to say a special thanks to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation. Through their generous support, these events are made possible. And of course, they are also provided generous funding through Generac Power Systems. So we would like to thank them for being a continued sponsor of the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation and the free programming that we are able to put out. Not only movie night discussions, but also our trivia nights and all of our virtual programming that goes along the lines of historian talks. And we got a lot of those coming up this summer, so please check out our website and look at all the great events that we have coming up. And we are proud to mention that we will be open to the public beginning on July 1st. Hooray, we finally get to go back to work. And just kind of around all that, we have a lot of great programming that we're really pushing this summer. And in August, we are going back to some in-person programs as well at the museum. So we are definitely looking forward to that. We are still going to keep a virtual platform available for all, well, not all of our events, but most of our events. So we are not going to change movie nights. We're not going to change our trivia nights or our book talks or any of our curator conversations. Those will continue as normal on our virtual platform. But yeah, we are definitely looking forward to going back to work and reopening the museum and having the public come and see us again. Tonight, like I said, we're talking about the 2014 movie Fury, a tank crew, actually a day in the life of a tank crew. And that was kind of something that I didn't realize as I was watching it, and I've seen this movie multiple times, I didn't realize that this was all encapsulated within a 24-hour period. It just never occurred to me. So I thought that was kind of an interesting little note. Sorry, John?
No, I just comment to Karen that
we didn't know that either, that it was a 24-hour period.
Yeah, it really didn't come through in the, they didn't push that in the movie, and it just, I don't know, to me it didn't seem like it. So as I was getting my notes ready and doing my research on this, I was kind of surprised to see that little tidbit. This movie was written by writer and director David Ayer. Cinematographer was Roman Vezyanov. And of course, it's starring, as you can see right here, Brad Pitt, Shia LaBeouf, John Bernthal, Michael Pena, and Jason Isaacs. It was produced by Columbia Pictures and released on 17 October of 2014 under the distribution rights of Sony Pictures. It had a budget of around $68 to $80 million. There's no definite figure on that. I think they're kind of keeping things a little secret nowadays. And their box office receipts totaled $211.8 million. So this was a good moneymaker for Columbia and Sony at the time. And overall, I thought it was a really good movie. It did not have any Academy Award nominations and obviously no wins if it wasn't nominated. It did have a couple Screen Actors Guild Award nominations, and I think it did win one. But this was not a critically acclaimed film, as most of the films that we've previewed on our movie night discussions have been. But still, I think it was a pretty decent film. What does everybody else think? What were your initial impressions of the movie?
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I saw it when it came out in the theater. Really looks good on the big screen. But I thought it was a terrific movie. And it had a special resonance for me because my father was a tank commander in World War II. He was part of the invasion to retake the Philippines, where they landed in Lingayen Bay on actually 5 years to the day before I was born. And he was a tank commander. He led a column of tanks through the jungles of the Philippines. And this movie was the first time, even though, I mean, he was one of these people who didn't talk much about the war. This was the first movie I'd seen that gave me a sense of what it must have been like for him to have been in one of these tanks, going through the jungle, worrying about ambushes. He was actually critically injured in an ambush in the Philippines, took a bullet in his head, and they managed to evacuate him, I think, during the battle to a hospital ship. So I have a kind of particular attraction to this movie because of that connection.
All right, excellent. Do you know, was he on a Sherman or was he on another type of tank? Do you know?
I'm not quite sure. I think it was a Sherman, but I don't know.
Okay. What were everybody else's thoughts on this movie, just initially? Sally, you're muted there.
Okay.
There you
Oh,
go.
I'm mute. Okay. I was surprised to find out that our tanks were less resilient than the Germans, that they had better tanks than we did, and that they still sent these poor guys out in that tank, like on suicide missions. It just disturbed me.
Yeah, that certainly was one of the main things about World War II. If you look at armored combat, we definitely had the disadvantage when it came to our armor compared or versus German armor. And in particularly when you're talking about the Tiger, I don't think there was a tank on the battlefield at this time that could really match the Tiger. Not only for speed, power, and also its main gun. There really wasn't much of a match for it at this time. And then, yeah, so, we see in the movie that one scene where there's 4 Shermans going after this Tiger. And a lot of accounts that I've read and a lot of depictions that you see, it's pretty accurate. You need to send, a platoon or 2 to go after these tanks because you're just not going to be able to fight them one-on-one like we can nowadays with other nations' armored vehicles. So yeah, you're right. That is kind of surprising to see. And then, like you said, these folks are going up against, far superior technology for the time. And yeah, suicide missions is kind of a good way to describe it. Dylan, you had something?
Eric, was the Tiger introduced it wasn't there at the beginning of the war, was it?
It was not, no. And
I'm not sure when it was introduced, but this movie was in early 1945, wasn't it?
correct, yeah,
if I remember correctly.
1 month before the war ends is
Right,
the way
okay.
that they describe it.
So the Tigers were out and being used. I don't think they used Tigers in North Africa.
I would have to go look at that. I don't know if they did or not. I know the Tigers were there when we invaded the coast, Normandy. Germans had Tigers then. I don't know if they used them in North Africa or not, though. I'd have to take a look at that. That's I'm going to write that down because now I want to know. I'll just kind of go through our discussion questions. There's a few points in the movie, not from an acting point of view, but from a cinematic point of view that I thought the movie was spectacular in capturing. And I'll bring those up as we go through. But the first thing that we noticed right away when the movie gets started, at least for me anyway, was the tank crew itself. What did you guys think was what was the dynamic there between the tank crew? How did they interact with one another? And what were their, I don't want to say impressions of each other, but what kind of bonds did you notice between the tank crew members?
I kind of had to say,
Go ahead, Sally.
Oh, I was going to say it seemed like they bonded except for the new kid on the block, which he had to earn their respect to be a part of the group.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
But that Cajun guy, I just didn't like his character at all. I couldn't stand him. He ruined the movie for me.
And as we're looking at the picture here, are you talking about the guy on the far right, Grady
Yes.
Davis? Yeah.
Yeah.
He was certainly a rough character. Not, well, in both senses of the term. His character, that he portrayed was very gruff, not seemingly a very nice guy, although we do catch glimpses of, the real human in him later on in the film. And then, just as far as that kind of person goes, yeah, he irritated the crew quite a bit. On purpose, he pushed buttons, and he really just tried to provoke reactions from everybody. But I think, maybe all of those guys did at some point or another. Chris, did you have a take on that?
I was going to say that they seemed like a bunch of brothers in a big family, just kind of constantly arguing with each other and yet very affectionate for each other. On the Blu-ray disc of this movie, they have a bunch of, they have some deleted scenes, they have some extended scenes. And when I watched that, I was very disappointed to see how much they left out about the backstories of these characters. You learn a lot from these extended scenes about why, for instance, the Brad Pitt character is in the Army, why he might have this affection, have this sort of particular affection for Norman. And I didn't get any of that out of the movie. I got it out of the extended scenes.
Okay.
Yeah, and as I was doing my research, because I don't have the Blu-ray version, I'm really jealous that every time we talk about these movies, you talk about the additional scenes that you get to watch, and I'm just like, oh man. But
All you have to do is buy it.
Yeah, I could, but I'm a penny pincher. I'm cheap. But yeah, you're right. And I was reading a lot about that. Like you said, how he got into the Army, why he does have that connection with Norman, why he speaks German pretty fluently, and a few other things that you don't get out of the initial cut of the film, and you would have to go and watch those deleted scenes from the Blu-ray. I was reading a couple interviews with the editor of the film, and actually they employed 4 different editors, which I found really bizarre. I don't know how you can maintain the pace and vision of a movie with 4 different people editing it all at the same time.
Yeah.
Although they did kind of divide the duties up, there was one editor who dealt specifically with the scenes that were really dialogue driven. There was one editor that dealt with the combat scenes. There was one editor who dealt with the scenes inside the tank with the crew members. So they each had different responsibilities, which I guess would make it a little easier to maintain consistency throughout. But still, having 4 editors on a film would be tough. And the main editor, I cannot remember her name right offhand, but I can look in just a second. She said that she didn't want to cut those scenes out either. But the way they edited the film, they didn't just edit it in blocks as a film normally would be edited, so that they're looking straight for time and content. She said it was a very fluid editing process. It was a new process that all of them had to deal with. And she said it was very difficult in deciding which scenes to keep and which scenes to cut. And she does kind of apologize, as Chris said, for not including those backstory scenes that would give you a little more insight into the characters.
Okay.
For me, the movie became much richer once I knew the backstories of these various characters. The story, the question you have about the horses metaphor and the meaning of horses became much more significant to me after I heard the backstory about Gordo.
Now, that's one that I didn't find in any of my research. Chris, can you talk about that a little bit? I'd like to hear that.
In one of the deleted scenes, it's after they get to the village and they're taking a rest, and there are four people sitting around. Norman's one of them, Gordo's another, and Gordo starts talking. They start talking about what their backgrounds are, and Norman is kind of in a semi-apologetic way of saying, "Well, I just worked in my dad's stationery store. We didn't sell anything that killed or anything like that." But Gordo tells a story about how his father came from, I think it was Mexico, worked in the slaughterhouses in Chicago, I think it was, and that he went to work in the slaughterhouses, and he describes about how he had to slaughter, how he worked on the kill floor, killing the cattle and even horses as they went through the production line. And when you see that story, when you hear that story, you kind of understand that scene, better understand that scene in the house with Emma and so on, where he goes into this whole thing about killing the horses on the battlefield. I really urge, if you have a chance, rent it or borrow it or buy it. The extended scenes are really useful for getting even a richer sense of this movie. One of the extended scenes is actually the opening scene where they arrive at the camp. They initially arrive at the camp, and Norman gets introduced to the crew.
Yeah, and I had heard, that scene where he meets Brad Pitt or War Daddy for the first time, that is a lot longer.
Yes.
It does give you a lot more information. And that, Chris, you set me up perfectly to my next question. When they do meet for the first time, War Daddy is very resistant to getting this new crew member. He just lost a crew member. You would think a tank commander would welcome a replacement.
Yeah.
Why do you think that he was very resistant, telling him that he's not his new replacement and trying to push him away?
Well,
All I can think, go ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead, Sally.
I was just going to say, all I can think of is they had this little clique already established. And just like when you're in high school, new kid on the block's not invited into the clique very easily.
Well, that's certainly one reason. John, did you have another take on that?
Yeah, he had a very tightly knit group that he had groomed since Africa, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw this inexperienced person. He knew, or he felt that one, either he was going to be killed because of his inexperience, or two, he's going to get one of his men killed because of his inexperience. And he just didn't want that. At least he wanted somebody that knew what he was doing around a tank. So he just didn't want him.
That's true.
Also, and I hate to do this, but I'm going to come back to the extended scenes.
No, Chris, go for it. Go for it.
Where you get background about War Daddy, and in this opening scene, he asks the Norman what his name is, and he says Norman. What becomes clear in the extended scenes about War Daddy and why he wound up in the army and so on, is that he had a brother named Norman, who he killed in an auto accident, and which led to his criminal conviction, and eventually a judge telling him it's the war or it's the army or whatever. So I kind of think that with that background, when I heard that background, I thought part of his reason for not wanting Norman there was he didn't want to and later in these extended scenes, he talks about how Norman reminds him of his brother.
Oh, sure.
And so I think that part of this was that he didn't want to be responsible for somebody like his brother being killed.
And it wasn't just his brother too, it was his brother's fiance as
right.
well.
Well, no, it was his fiance.
Oh, his fiance.
It was the woman he was going to marry.
All right.
Oh.
Yeah.
And it was a drunk driving accident, wasn't it?
Right. Yeah, skidding off an icy road. And that's how that's in that extended scene, you also get the explanation for all those burns on his back.
Yeah, was it the radiator landing on his back or something?
Yeah,
like that?
he says it was the engine.
Well, I think if it was the engine, it probably would have crushed him.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. But that's why I say that these extended scenes, I have to agree with that editor that these would have made the movie so much richer in terms of understanding the relationship among all these all the characters.
Yeah, if we had that information, really, I found that all the characters were unlikable. I mean, I couldn't relate to them. They were, just didn't click with me. But again, didn't know any of the backstory of how they became what they became. And I think, something like that would be, immensely.
That means it's Blu-ray for us.
I think so.
Yeah, certainly those backstories would help. And Karen, I was kind of right there with you as well. I didn't particularly like, to use the expression kind of loosely, I didn't particularly like any of the characters either.
Right.
Except for Brad Pitt, and not because it was Brad Pitt.
Oh, I didn't like
I thought the way that he commanded that tank is exactly the same way that I would command it.
Oh,
You're a father figure. You're going to do your best to protect all your boys, but at the same time, you are hard as nails on them. You are going to push them. You are going to drive them, and especially in a wartime scenario, there's no room for, you know, for lack of a better term, being nice. You know, you're there to do a job, and you are going to, you know, grind whatever grist the mill requires to get that job done. So I liked his character as far as that goes. Sally, I'm right there with you. I did not like Grady Davis at all. And I find it kind of hard to watch the film every time simply because of him. And particularly the dining room scene. Oh, that just,
oh, yeah.
Yes. Oh,
let's talk about that for a second. Why, when Norman and War Daddy are with Emma and Irma in the apartment, and then the rest of the crew arrives, you know, why does War Daddy get so not mad, but you could tell he's visibly put out by their presence? But this is his tank crew. These are his boys. They're supposed to, you know, and like Chris said, they're like a family. They're tight knit. So you would think that maybe he would welcome their presence. Why do you think that he did not welcome their presence this time? And we'll start with you.
They were invading his moment. He was
Yeah.
clean shaven, having a meal, thinking he was somewhat taking a piece of home
normal. Yeah.
normal,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they broke it. They broke that atmosphere.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think it was also because this was an oasis of calm in the middle of all this chaos. And particularly with Norman there, he was trying to be a father figure, especially to Norman. Seeing, I mean, Norman is a, you know, he's kind of an innocent, he's kind of a Billy Budd kind of character in this movie. And seeing the relationship between Emma and Norman, I think, was something that he wanted to allow to at least exist for a while. And all these kind of boorish guys come rushing in and break it all up.
I agree.
Yeah, they're half drunk. You know, they just got done fighting. That always kind of, you know, raises the hair on everybody's neck. So yeah, John, you said that it was kind of like a bit of normalcy for Norman and for War Daddy.
Yes.
I'm curious, in a situation like that, is a bit of normalcy, is that dangerous perhaps?
Well, I think War Daddy being normal would take him out of his authoritarian character that he had to have. And I think that's why he snapped back at it at the table. He could listen to these guys, but he did want to let them know he was still in charge when he stood up and slapped the pistol down. That it's gone far enough. We have work to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that scene, I always have trouble with that scene for a few reasons. And then, of course, at the very end of it, the apartment that they're in gets hit by a shell. And Norman runs over there, and lo and behold, who does he find but Emma? You know, and that's I don't care who you are. That's kind of hits you a little bit. It's going to kind of pull at your heartstrings just a touch. And it certainly does with Norman. One of the other questions I asked is that, you know, Norman is going through a lot. And especially now that we know that this is all within a 24-hour period, that makes it even more intense for him. And there's many things that happen to him throughout the course of the film that, I don't know, could be viewed either negatively or, I don't want to say positively, but maybe in a positive light as far as him becoming a warrior in a war zone. But what do you think was the one trigger, perhaps, that kind of changed his reference, his frame of mind, in going from Norman to, what was the nickname that they gave him?
Machine.
What was it again, Chris?
Machine.
Machine, that's right, yes. What do you think that one turning point was?
Can't either when you started in the tank.
I'm sorry, was that
Oh, we're kibitzing here.
was that Karen?
Yeah,
We're trying to come up with the right
trying to
answer.
yeah,
Oh, there's no right answer.
trivia game.
No,
you know?
it was when he was in the tank, and I just can't remember the situation that triggered him to become good on the trigger.
Right, it's like something lit up in him that
I just can't remember.
yeah,
what
I
it was.
can't remember the circumstance. Yeah, other than he was in the tank.
Okay. I mean,
I don't think it was when he was made to shoot the German. I do not
Yeah.
think that's what turned him.
no, and quite honestly, I mean, he didn't really shoot him. You know, he had the gun in his hand, but he didn't pull the trigger. He
Yeah.
didn't want to pull the trigger. He's a very idealistic kid, you know, very bright-eyed. It was interesting what Chris said about some of the backstory of him, that he worked at a stationery shop. You know, and then all of a sudden he gets thrust into army. You know, at least he's kind of like a paper pusher, and you know, a personal, we call it PAC, the Personnel Action Center. You know, he was kind of one of those types, and all of a sudden he gets thrust into a tank position. You know, like I said, we have to remember this is at the very end of the war, so getting replacements that were technically proficient was a difficult thing at this point, especially when it comes to tanks or maybe other types of combat systems that require some level of technical proficiency. And so it is unfortunate that, you know, you sign up to do a job that you don't think is going to be very deadly or dangerous, and all of a sudden you're put into that position. I would argue that, you know, every soldier is a soldier first and foremost, but, you know, you have to be trained for certain things, and Norman certainly was not trained for this job. Sally, what do you think maybe was the turning point for him?
You know, I'm kind of with John and Karen. I can't remember exactly what it was. The only thing that comes to mind was me is something snapped in his head. It was like kill or be killed. As long as I'm here, I might as well do my job.
Yeah, there's a couple different points in the tank with Norman. The first one came rather early in the film when they were on their very first road march with him, and he saw the German soldier in the tree line, and he hesitated for a couple seconds, and that cost the tank behind him, or I'm sorry, the tank in front of him, the lieutenant's tank. It cost them the whole tank crew and their lives. And then there was another time when they were assaulting those anti-tank guns that were hidden in the wood line. And through no fault of his own, he ran out of ammunition. He was trying to reload. And the German pops out that little hole right in front of him with the Panzerfaust. And, you know, he can't reload in time, and the German soldier gets a shot off. And he's kind of blamed for both of those. I think those could be considered significant for sure. Chris, how about you?
I think it was that scene in particular that converted him. I mean, he's fighting this instinct not to shoot, and finally it just cracks for him when he's confronted with the reality of life or death.
Well, that's really the trick, isn't it? You know, I don't pretend to, you know, speak for everybody, but when you are in those situations and you are put into life or death, you know, instance, everybody has different reactions, and I always try to, when I'm giving tours at the museum or I'm talking to somebody about, you know, Medal of Honor winners or whatnot, you never know who those people are going to be that can react and overcome those very difficult situations and perform the way that they're trained. You just never know. It could be me, it could be you, it could be anybody. And until you're put in that situation, you just don't know how you're going to perform, what kind of reaction you're going to have. We in the movie Saving Private Ryan, when they're storming the Normandy beach, you know, you see a couple different scenes where guys are just sitting there crying and praying. These guys have been trained and trained and trained till they're blue in the face to do their infantry job. But then when it comes time to actually do it, you know, you freeze, or, you know, some other emotion comes over you that you just can't control. For me, I would say that it was the death of Emma that really changed him.
Yeah.
You know, you're
Okay.
Yeah.
trying to maintain your ideals, you're trying to do good, and in one instance you do some good. You do have a few moments of an impact, not only on somebody else, but they have that on you as well. And to have that all erased within moments, you know, to me, that scene when he runs up there and he's trying to dig her out, I could just imagine in his head, he's like, what are we doing all this for? Why are we doing this? It's not making a difference. So let's really just get to it and start to make a difference and finish this thing. So we can get back to that normalcy that we just had for a few seconds there. But, you know, it could very easily be any one of those points that everybody pointed out. You know, who knows what people are thinking in those situations. Chris, one of the questions that I had in my notes here was, I was going to ask anybody if they watched the additional content or the deleted scenes. So I'm really glad you did. And please, anytime throughout the conversation, if you have that insight, we will certainly welcome it.
But I do have a comment about the scene where Emma, Irma, and the whole crew is there.
Mhm.
When they show up, you see Gordo with this top hat on.
Yeah.
And there's no explanation for how he got it. And yet in the deleted scene, in the extended scene for that, you see exactly how he got it. And it's a very casual thing where some German citizen is walking by and he just grabs the hat off the guy and puts it on his head and kind of jauntily walks off. But the thing that struck me about it, and this goes to a different movie entirely out of this genre, is the James Bond movie Spectre, which opens up with a scene from Mexico and the Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
And where people are walking around, they look like skeletons. It's a religious celebration, and they're all wearing top hats like that. When he shows up in the movie, when Gordo shows up with that top hat on, and he's, as I recall, he's kind of carrying something that looks like a cane or whatever. What struck me was that almost had a religious significance. I mean, that was a religious symbol, a Day of the Dead kind of character, which seemed very appropriate to all the death that's going on throughout the movie.
Yeah, and I can expand on that just a little bit more as well. And I cannot recall the author or the name of the series of books, but there was a German author who wrote a fictional series of books about a German tank crew in World War II. And the driver, which was one of the main characters in the series, often wore a top hat. And so his wearing of the top hat was like an homage to that series of books and that character. So if you want to check that out, you can find that rather easily with a quick Google search, and I believe those books are still available. I'd like to read them at some point. It sounds like a really good series, even though it is fictional. And I think the main reason that it kind of interests me so much is that it is a view from the other side, which is really something that we don't get very often, particularly through film. You know, we always see, you know, the American side of it or the British side of it. Rarely do we get to see the side of the enemy. So just a little more on your point, Chris, about that top hat.
Clint Eastwood did a movie looking at the other side and on the Pacific War.
Yeah, in fact, it was a two-part kind of thing. There was the American side and then the Japanese side. Yeah.
Right.
And speaking of Clint Eastwood, his son Scott Eastwood is in this movie. Very small role, Sergeant Miles. I really don't recall him very much, but I know that there is one scene where he is kind of prominent. He's on the tank. He's standing at the back and he's holding the 50 cal. And it's kind of funny, as I was doing some of my research on this, I guess Brad Pitt and Shia LaBeouf really were not too happy with him because he kept spitting tobacco juice on the tank, and they thought that was very disrespectful. And so they really almost got into a real life fight the day they were shooting that, until they went back to their trailers and tents that night, and they actually looked at the script, and the script says right in it that he's supposed to be spitting tobacco juice.
Uh-oh.
He's just doing what he's supposed to do, what the director told him to do in the script, but it almost caused a real life fist fight.
Well, the other thing that you find out about in the Blu-ray stuff is that they were actually using real World War II Sherman tanks, and they were all and they had this great affection for the tank itself, almost as a member of the family. I mean, when they talk about it as their home, they really meant it. The 5 characters had gone through a basic training, literally, under the supervision of some Navy SEALs in preparation for this. And they bonded through that training, and then bonded with this tank, which was very carefully curated at one of the museums in Britain. The other thing about the Tiger tank was it was the only, they only have about something like 10 Tiger tanks still in the world. And that was the only one that actually functioned.
Yeah, that is the only operational Tiger tank at that point in time in the entire world. It comes from the Bovington Tank Museum in England. And there was one review of the movie that I was reading that said watching the movie just to see a real Tiger tank in operation is worth the price of admission just for that alone. And I kind of would agree. I sort of have a kind of a love affair with the Tiger tank. Being a former tanker myself, I think that is a beautiful piece of machinery. It is absolutely frightening to look at. And you know, it just really, it put the fear of God into everybody when it was coming at you. And especially if you're inside a Sherman. I really think that tank was the thing. And then Chris, you know, kind of going back to what you were talking about, as I said, I'm a former tank commander myself, is absolutely right. Your tank does become your home. It does become, well, for them, it would have been the 6th member of the crew. For us, it would have been the 5th. But yeah, that you love your tank. You treat it like you would treat your brother or your cousin or your mother. You put every ounce of devotion and sweat into it because it is going to save your butt in the right times if you take care of it. If you don't take care of it, it's not going to save you at all. And then yeah, you know, the Shermans, that was one of the things that I really did like about the movie, was that they did use authentic World War II vehicles. They used authentic World War II uniforms. If you look at the uniforms, I think they did a great job of keeping with you know, the time period. I didn't find any flaws in that at all. And then the tanks themselves. Brad Pitt said, you know, to be able to climb onto a Sherman every day and actually fire it and command it and move it through the countryside, he said that is a once in a lifetime experience, you know, that he, much less, you know, us regular suckers, aren't going to get ever. So that just makes me, you know, that was one of the points that I really liked about the movie. And the fact that they did the tank crew, you know, the inside when they were actually fighting, they did that accurately. The fire commands were spot on. I love Brad Pitt saying, you know, I'm going to light this up with my 50 cal. You look for my tracers and you shoot there. We would absolutely do that on our tanks. Many times have done that on our tanks. That's a good way to get the reference for the gunner to know what the tank commander is talking about. Tanks nowadays, you know, the gunner can be engaging one target and the tank commander is finding others. And as soon as the gunner is done with one, he hits a button and the tank just automatically goes to the next target. We didn't have that technology when I was in, and certainly not during World War II. So, and then just the way that they operated inside the tank itself. Calm, cool, collected. You're not yelling and screaming. That creates confusion. You're just talking. Nice and methodical. And that's the way we would operate as well. So I really thought they did a good job in recreating the tank crew dynamics as far as that goes in the combat scenes. Other aspects of combat scenes were not so accurate. You know, those 4 tanks going to fight that one tiger, they would not be 2-3 feet away from each other. That just you couldn't do that. You wanted at least 100 meters in between each tank. You wanted them spread out. You wanted that other tank to make him look from the far left to the far right. You didn't want to create anything that was so close together that you didn't even have to traverse the turret to see anything. The infantry as well, you know, when they come out from behind the tanks, when they're assaulting the wood line, they're all bunched up together and they're shooting and then ducking down, and that wouldn't have happened either. They would have come out much later in that attack, and then they would have just rushed straight for the wood line. And I was telling Molly earlier, you can't really shoot those kinds of scenes and remain accurate simply because you just don't have those wide lenses. You can't have 50 infantrymen 50 meters apart and still contain the whole scene in one shot. You couldn't do it. You would have to pan all the way across. So, you know, you got to give the director and the cinematographer some sort of leeway, I would think. You know, this is Hollywood. You are making a movie. So there's certain considerations that you have to just kind of suspend for a little bit.
The director, again, in the extended scenes, when he was talking about making the film, said that he would get criticism from some people from some tankers for inaccuracies. And one of them that he points out himself is the scene where the Germans blow up the last tank in the column. And he said that simply would not have happened that way. That they would have blown up the last tank or the first tank to stop the column, blown up the last tank to find the column, and then killed everybody else in the middle. But he said, if we'd blown up the first tank, Brad Pitt's gone. There was no story.
Yeah. So like I said, it's Hollywood. You have to kind of suspend some of your considerations, some of your technicalities for the sake of making a movie. But you're absolutely right. That's exactly how we would have done it, Chris. You knock out the first tank, you knock out the last tank, and then everybody else is fish in a barrel. I kind of want to go back to the horses. Actually, no, I don't want to do that just yet. I want to talk about the religious aspects of the movie. There was a lot of religious undertones and some overtones as well. The one that really struck me, and it's kind of early in the film, you already get to see a couple examples. You get to talk the Bible, Shia LaBeouf. You get to see some 2.5-ton trucks pulling in with crosses mounted on the very front. But there's one scene in particular where the tank platoon is moving. I can't remember exactly where it is, but Brad Pitt looks up and he sees all these bombers just heading right into Germany. It looks like hundreds of bombers, and you could see a few German aircraft up there trying to repulse them. Germany did not have much of an air force at this time. They had pretty much all been blasted out of the sky by 1945. But that one scene in particular just really reminded me of Angels, to be quite honest, and how the forces of, and I'm not a religious person, and I don't know all the details, but the forces of, the good versus the bad angels coming together to have that one final battle. That's what it kind of reminded me of. Anybody else notice any other, maybe overt or maybe not so overt religious tones that the director used?
I thought that the scenes where they show the Germans being hung from poles with the signs on them was kind of a religious trope. Because the signs were basically saying, you are opposing our God, Hitler.
Yeah.
And that, and even though it wasn't exactly crosses, crucifix, it was just the continuous scenes of that as they roll down the roadway, just struck me as having a religious import to them. I think it kind of looked like some of the scenes, as I recall, out of the movie Spartacus.
Oh, Spartacus.
Yep.
Where they hung the traitors, so to speak.
Anybody else have a take on that? No? And okay, so I wanted to bring that one up first, but then I'd like to get back to the horses as well. You know, Chris, having access to those deleted scenes, you know, we get a bit of a background, especially with Gordo, about, you know, the horses, and then he tells that story about the tank crew having to, you know, kill the horses, and he looks at Norm and he says, "You weren't there." You know, so, and I thought that was kind of an important scene. It was very dramatic, very heavy. It's just the way he's looking at it and saying, you know, you weren't there. That kind of puts a lot into perspective. But the horses themselves, the movie starts out with a white horse. And there are many references to horses throughout. Aside from Gordo's backstory that we hear, can you think of any other reasons why the director kind of put the emphasis on horses as a metaphorical device?
No.
Well, you kind of have the four horses of the apocalypse notion.
That's kind of what I was looking at. Yeah, Chris, exactly.
That, I mean, including the opening scene where you've got this lone Nazi soldier riding his horse through this apocalyptic scene. And he just looks like an sort of not an angel of death in a sense. I mean, he just looks so forbidding. And then, of course, you know, Brad Pitt jumps him and kills him.
But it said that death rides a pale horse.
Yeah.
As soon as I saw the white horse, I said, "There's got to be some metaphor there that he's riding a pale horse."
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there
Yeah,
was
that
one
was-
toward the end, wasn't there? Near the end, wasn't there somebody riding another white horse? I should have made notes.
Yeah, I want to say that there was, John. I can't quite recall it, but I think you're right.
I don't know where to deal with them.
It's when that they kept, or they held the intersection, and as the German troops were moving past, I think somebody was on a white horse. That's
Yeah, there's just that continual reference, you know, throughout the whole movie to horses. And you know, Chris, I thought the same thing as you did right away from that opening scene. You know, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and then yeah, John, you know, death comes on or what was the quote you said?
I thought death rides a pale horse.
Right,
Something like that.
exactly. And that
Another
kinda
Clint
harkens-
Eastwood Pale Rider,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
I was
Yes.
just gonna
Pale
say,
Rider.
yeah. One of my favorite Clint Eastwood movies.
And there's also the scene, which is very small, of the elderly woman who's carving up a horse for food.
Yes.
Which
I
then,
missed that.
again, going back to Gordo's backstory, he talks about having killed horses in the slaughterhouse, which became food. Again, in the Blu-ray, that scene with the woman, she actually talks to the soldiers in the scene that was cut. Whereas in the movie, she doesn't. She just kind of looks silently at them, if anything at all.
And then, like you were saying, Chris, you know, that first scene, you have that horse coming through, and it's the lone German soldier, and then all of a sudden, Brad Pitt jumps off the tank, and you said he kills him. He doesn't just kill him; he stabs him straight through the eye.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings me to the graphic nature of this movie. Do you think it was too graphic?
For
I
me,
do. I do.
Yeah.
me too.
Yeah, I just thought it was very violent, and I watch violent movies. It doesn't really impact me, but I thought this one,
Yeah.
was too violent.
Me too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I tell you, one of the graphic things that I saw that really put some reality into it was in the scene where the four tanks were going after the Tiger, and the Tiger tank was firing at them.
Mhm.
Just the speed of which the rounds were passing the tank. You know, in some of these movies, somebody gets up and shoots a rifle and another guy goes, "Oh," and he falls. Here you could see the speed of those rounds going past the tank, and that put some realism in it for me. I mean, the speed of that going by and saying, that's the way it happens. It's not something made up when you shoot and somebody drops. No, those things move that fast. It was violent the way it hit the tank and blew it up, but the speed in which those things travel added some realism to me.
I think it was in that scene where one of the artillery shells takes off Binkowski's head.
Yes.
Yeah, and then there was another scene when they're going through one of the towns where the German sniper just literally shoots the legs out from under a couple of the American soldiers. I mean, I certainly it's a violent movie, but the violence seemed to me to be in service of the story itself. I mean, I don't know how you could tell this story without the level of violence that was that the director brought to it.
Yeah, and it also kind of forced me to look at the evolution of World War II movies. And actually, I was reading an interview with the director, David Ayer, and he had a great quote. He said, each generation peels off a different layer or two to get to the understanding or their understanding of the war itself. So when you go back and you look at movies that are closer to the actual event of World War II, such as Dirty Dozen, The Longest Day, movies that we've already looked at, you don't have that level of violence. You don't have the level of graphic visuals that you see, and I'll just kind of be generic about it, Saving Private Ryan forward. And so, this kind of speaks to how we, as each generation succeeds, how we look at World War II. And I think we're starting to get to the point where we're looking at it more realistically. And it is making us uncomfortable in certain ways because we are so used to seeing it in a very, I don't want to say tame manner, but you don't see the violence, you don't see the graphic nature of it in some of the older films, as you start to see nowadays, like I said, with Saving Private Ryan, Fury, and other movies that have come out since. So I think this is just one way of each generation looking at it and trying to dissect it a little bit more and trying to really get down to the heart of what it was like to be in combat. And I've always thought, especially since I was a tanker, I've always thought, this would be the ultimate. That would be the greatest thing, is to be in a tank battle in World War II. That's what a tanker is made to do. And the more you see the realistic side of it, maybe the more I'm maybe thinking that I was okay in Desert Storm. I'm good with that.
I think that the after World War I and through the early 60s, the war movies pretty much sanitized the violence of war.
Yeah.
And I think the big change came with Vietnam, because Vietnam was, as they say, the first televised war. And so we were bringing in these scenes of violence about what war really looked like. And I think that started to change the attitude towards what we think about in terms of whether we're getting an accurate depiction, even in fictional movies, about what the war experience is actually like, the battle experience.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree.
Yeah, that's a good point.
One thing, just sort of from a smart aleck point of view, while they were pretty accurate in depicting, what it was like to be in combat in World War II, I couldn't help but think that these guys really shot like a bunch of stormtroopers, though. They couldn't hit nothing on both sides. Everybody was missing left and right. You got a couple close calls where the shells are pinging off the turret. But man, these guys, their accuracy with their weapons just wasn't very good. And, of course, I'm looking at it from, my own standpoint. I was on an M1A1 tank. We had all the computerization. Shia LaBeouf's in there trying to do things manually, and the trigger is on his foot. I couldn't imagine having to press my left foot to fire the main gun. That would be a very different experience.
I think there was a study done, I can't remember by whom. It was a Pentagon type study after World War II about how many rounds were fired and how many rounds took effect. And it was pretty low. The ratio was, just expending ammunition all over the place. And it reminded me, I was a police officer in Washington, D.C. for a while. And in the course of the academy training, one of the things they told us about using our weapons was that the typical firefight with police and a suspect occurred at, I think it was a distance of 21 feet. They exchanged like 11 bullets and none of them took effect. So, and it's because of the adrenaline, the chaos, the tension, that even though you're shooting a lot of ammunition, you're so in such a state of chaos that you really aren't having an effect that you want, which is quite a bit different from like the sniper in the movie, who is very, very calm, very methodical, and knows exactly what he's doing, even in the midst of all this chaos.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Like I said, in our tank, everything was calm and cool. We practiced and trained that way. And when it came time to do it for real, that's the way we executed. Everybody was talking. There was no yelling. And people are kind of surprised to hear that. Everybody thinks that, it's a chaotic scene in there and it's very loud and everybody's shouting. It's nothing like that at all. The inside of a tank is eerily quiet, to be honest. Outside, it's a different matter, but inside that tank crew, it is very calm. It is very quiet. Almost, I don't want to say almost to a whisper, but tones are very low and you just can't hear anything inside of there that is loud. Everything on the outside is drowned out completely when you're inside. I just kind of want to get real quick. We're starting to run out of time, but of course, I always ask this question. I want to get to it, and I want to talk about the characters themselves. I don't know. I think I had the question on there about this. This tank crew being sort of a Hollywood cliche type of crew. We see this over and over again throughout movies. You have this diverse crew. You usually have, the really religious guy. You usually have a Southerner. You have somebody who's more from a metropolitan area. You have the father figure in Brad Pitt. Were you disappointed at all with how the crew was portrayed when you consider, Hollywood cliches? Sally, you're saying no?
I wasn't disappointed. I think they portrayed what I would perceive as a bunch of different varieties of people that were soldiers. I mean, they come from all walks of life and different reasons for being there, as Chris has said. So I wasn't disappointed except for that goofy aging guy. But I'm sure there are people like that in service. So I mean,
Oh, there certainly are.
Yep.
So did I like him? No, but was he real? Probably.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of interesting when Norman first shows up, they ask him, he's asked where he's from and he kind of stutters and then they say, nobody cares where you're from.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, and that was, I mean, even though we talk about these cliche crews, it struck me that in the end, nobody really cares about where you're from or what your background is. The only issue is, are you going to do your job?
Do your job.
Exactly.
Yeah. Who is, we'll go around the room here and I'll start with Molly. Who was your favorite character and why?
Ooh, that's a good one. I would say Norman, I think,
Yeah.
just because I think you really get attached to him because he's new and he doesn't know what's going on. But then you see that he really does start to get attached to the crew.
All right. John, Karen?
Okay. I guess I said before, I didn't like any of the characters, but I guess it would have to be War Daddy. He's kind of a slow burn throughout the whole movie, and I think maybe at the end you appreciate what he's done, the way he leads and how he cares for his crew. So I guess I would say War Daddy there.
And he's Brad Pitt.
And he's Brad Pitt, but you
Well, and
know.
he's got a great haircut too. I mean, man, I
Didn't
love
he
that
though?
haircut.
Yeah.
She wanted more of the shirts off scenes.
But I do think that Brad Pitt is also a very good actor. So that contributed to it as well. So I'll go with that.
I think he's a very underrated actor.
Yeah.
I don't think people give him enough credit for his capabilities on screen.
Right. I agree.
I will concur with War Daddy once
Yeah.
again for those much the same reasons. The way he managed the crew and kept them together and kept them on point to get their task done.
Sally, how about you?
Like Norman.
Norman?
I've never liked Brad Pitt, believe it or not, shirt or shirt, on or off, I don't like him. It's an actor. And I'm very ticked off he got an Academy Award. But I like Norman just because new kid on the block, underdog, and he evolves and becomes a good soldier, and then he survives. By luck. I mean,
The only one to survive.
right, the only one to survive.
Chris, how about you?
I don't know that I'd say that if I had to lean anywhere, it would be Norman, again, for the reasons that have already been stated. But also the director made the point that in terms of what the movie was, the dynamic of the movie, was that the movie was really about Norman. It wasn't about any of the other characters, that the movie, that the Norman character holds the movie together because we're always coming back to him in a way that we aren't coming back to the other characters.
Yeah, and I did have a question on here about the focus on the small group dynamic of the tank crew itself. Even though there were a lot of other contributors to the storyline, it really focused on that. And I was curious if it detracted or added to the movie. But we are running out of time, so we can't get into that. As far as favorite character goes, I will say, simply for the sake of being different, Captain Wagner. Which was played by Jason Isaacs. And really the only reason that I say that that was my favorite character is because I'm so used to him in the Harry Potter series as Draco Malfoy's father, Lucius Malfoy, long hair and his very stylized British accent. And then here he is in this movie with this, Lower East Side, New Jersey accent.
Oh, I'm gonna
Commanding these guys. I just thought that was great to see him in such a completely different role. Just so completely out of step from what I've seen him in before. So I just thought that was kind of great to see him like that.
Can I make one other comment?
Sure, absolutely, Chris.
Yeah, I just want to, in terms of the group dynamic and the cliches and so on, I thought it was interesting that throughout the whole movie, as far as I could tell, there was only one black soldier, and that was the soldier that comes in at the dinner and announces that they've got a new mission. In the extended cuts and so on. There's a second black soldier who never shows up in the movie. He apparently wound up on the cutting room floor, and he was in that small 4-person group where Gordo describes his experience on the killing floor in the slaughterhouse.
Actually, I did notice a couple others, although they didn't have any speaking roles. You do see them in the background, and one of the pictures that Molly chose for one of the slides, you can see them walking together in the background behind War Daddy, if I'm not mistaken. And I remembered those two in particular, and I remember thinking, wow, this is, I don't know how accurate it is that they're showing these black soldiers in a tank unit like that. I was always under the impression that they were used primarily, yeah, you can see them right there, those two.
Yeah.
And so I just thought I don't know how accurate that would be during this period in time. But I remember as soon as I saw them, I was very struck by seeing them together. And then we don't get to see that one scene, Chris, because it is a deleted scene. But yeah, I did kind of wonder about that. And I was like, I thought it was cool that you do get to see this other side that, is normally not portrayed, of having, ethnic or different ethnicities in the film, because you just don't see that in World War II movies very often.
No.
So yeah, I was right there with you on that.
One of the things I always do when we watch these movies is I look at rank, and I explained to Karen, I said, now, he's a staff sergeant, and immediately somebody called him top, which is first sergeant.
Right.
And I said, usually a first sergeant is at least a master sergeant, and she's looking at me like I'm nuts. And I said, but he's only 3 up and 1 down, he's only a staff sergeant. So I don't know why he's top. And then when he went into one of the tents, or I think it was a tent, somebody said, everybody else is dead. You're now the first sergeant. So yes, he was a staff sergeant, but in that group, he became the first sergeant. So I always look at rank just to check who's telling who what to do. Drives her
Yeah,
nuts.
I was right there with you on the top thing too. That's what we would call first sergeant. Absolutely. And nobody else. But they use different terms back in 1944 or 45 rather, just throughout the 40s, throughout the war. I wouldn't criticize them on that. But I did have that same response. Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, it is a few minutes after 8. So I guess we'll wrap up our conversation here. I hope everybody can join us next month. And I'm looking to see what we have next month. Oh, the last full measure. That's right. That's the one I chose. If I'm not mistaken, that is still available on Netflix.
Yeah.
So you can check that out. I have not seen the movie, so I'm definitely looking forward to seeing it. And that will be on the 30th of July, right at the tail end of the month. So I hope everybody can come back and join us for that.
Yeah.
And then as well, like I said, at the top of the event, we have a lot of events coming up along with the reopening of the museum. So please check our website for all these great programming pieces that we have coming up. And I want to thank everybody for showing up tonight and enjoying our discussion and our conversation. I always enjoy talking about movies, and I'm glad you guys do too. So it really just makes me happy that we get to continue to do this. And I hope everybody has a great weekend.